I'm going to kind of cover a couple things to kind of give perspective for you here in this particular neighborhood. We realized on an April 6th we had a situation, and that's some more details and things that we're doing, so you can see what's actually taking place. But let me give you a little perspective. We have, last year, as many of you know, we had a large number, an increase in terms of what we call weapons violations. A weapons violation is basically a discharge of a firearm inside of the city. Sometimes they are involving, they hit people, in a case it's a felony. Sometimes we find no evidence that the shooting took place, it's just a report that the shots fired. And sometimes we had damage to property and damage to, people, like I said, being hurt. This year in this neighborhood, we've had one. We've had one. In the surrounding areas in the community, we've had a total of 16. 2 of those, we're not sure if there was even a weapons violation. We've had a couple that have actually been involved, and people have been hurt. They're being fully investigated by investigations. And they're not in this area. They're in other parts of the city. Our shots fired cases thus far this year are where they were the year before last, which was when we had a much fewer number. But that doesn't make it any easier for those of you that have a bullet hole in your window or heard those rounds go off. I realize that completely. There's a few of us that have heard those things fired at us from time to time, including myself, and it's very nerve-wracking. I can only imagine what it's like in your home. I've never had that in my home. I have had a crossbow arrow come through my wall from a neighbor many, many years ago. That was enough to be alarming. So I do understand that breach, if you will, of your personal space. Okay? Let me talk a little bit about where we are in terms of crime here, because that was a question that came up. This year alone, year to date, we've had a total of 6 property crimes. Last year, this time, we had 16. That would include things like burglary, vandalism, all sorts of things like that. And we've had only one crime this year involving any kind of destruction of the private property. This time last year, we had 14. So as alarming as that incident was on North Patrick, we're in a pretty safe environment down here compared to some other parts of the city. Now, when we talk about crime in the city, how many of you saw the crime, part 1, part 2 crime results that came out? Okay, let me kind of explain that a little bit. We're required, all law enforcement agencies are required to report what we call the National Incident-Based Reporting System to the FBI on an annual basis, data which reflects certain types of crime. Part 1 crime includes everything from homicide, rape, robbery, burglary, aggravated assault, larceny, and the like. Not all of those are violent crimes, as you can imagine. Of the total number of crimes, we actually had a 19% plus change over the year before. Only 3% of those, 3.3%, were violent crimes. But what drove those numbers? Well, some of those were actually related to the questions that you asked. Auto theft. Our auto theft was off the charts, and it wasn't just in this city. The same thing has happened in all the surrounding jurisdictions. There were issues with auto theft when it came up largely in this city, largely because, during the lockdown, what did we do with our cars? We didn't drive them. And if you parked them out there and didn't check them, when you did come out, sometimes they were gone. We put out information throughout the year on that, trying to tell people to lock your cars. Many of those cars are not locked. Some of those cars are taken because they were keys left in the ignition, the car was running. And somebody went in and just did something, next thing you know, they left. Not putting the blame on the victim here, but those are the kinds of things that we were seeing last year. And it was actually a national trend. We saw that in many cities across this country. The Police Executive Research Forum surveyed about 67 major cities and mid-cities and small cities, And this was the thing in a lot of them. About 2/3 of them showed stolen autos. The other thing, we had an awful lot of larcenies. And the larcenies really started picking up in the summer. There's a couple of reasons for that. We ended up with two major companies that changed their posture on petty larceny of a shoplifter. And so we were getting calls for a lot of those, starting the year before, and carried into this year. The other thing we found is many of those larcenies, the petty larcenies were driving a lot of this, and directly related to, in my opinion, things where people were trying to market products that they could sell during the COVID experience, like detergent pods. I mean, who would think that you would want to see people taking off detergent pods that they were doing? The other thing we had with larcenies is a lot of our larcenies were not just within the city. For example, remember the ABC break-ins that we had? You know that those were occurring in Arlington and Fairfax County as well. Same MO. We were working with those agencies to try to apprehend the folks that were involved in this. They also moved in different other parts of the state, parts north of the Potomac. So some of this was organized. The bottom line is, our numbers compared to a lot of other jurisdictions are comparable or less, unfortunately, than some of the others we have. And I can't explain the numbers because I've been looking at those kinds of numbers for a lot of years, and I haven't seen those kinds of numbers. And most chiefs are feeling the same way. Part of it we think is the pandemic. Part of it is also the national discussion of policing. And because it's changed some of the dynamics we think that's taking place in our world. But that's okay. There's those numbers we own, and they are what they are. Getting back to Part 2 crime, this is interesting. The thing that we were down in Part 2 crime in every category except destruction of property and vandalism. So we looked into it. A lot of those were directly related to car break-ins where there was nothing taken. It's not an auto burglary, a car wasn't taken, but the window was broken. And an awful lot of those were also directly related to posters and things like that at certain times, you know, after May 25th, where demonstrators are placing stuff on the road or on the walls and stuff like that, minor stuff. But it subsided considerably in the fall. But we had that went kind of through the summer. But everything else in that area went down. Now, part of that, I'll be honest with you, was the decriminalization of marijuana effective July 1. Because it's no longer a drug offense. And so, you know, it's a civil offense, so you didn't see those in those numbers. So, but everything else went down in the Part 3 crime. The other thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was I want to talk a little bit about the questions on how we respond to stuff as a department. We discuss our crime patterns on a regular basis. We had a little bit of a problem there with analysts not being around, but we look at where crime's taking place and try to deploy our assets along those lines. Some folks ask, do we have bikes? Yes, we have officers on foot. We have officers that come on bikes. We have, depending on what we're looking at, we'll tailor it to whatever we need to do. And I'm going to let the patrol commanders talk a little bit about what they do specifically in their division. The other thing that we do is we put out a lot of information on trying to keep people safe. And one of the things that we try to do is, you know, not only like, for example, make sure you lock your car, for example, but we also put other stuff out. Not always do people respond to that. So we ask for folks to kind of, you know, pay attention to that. The other thing I would also say is that we investigate a lot of crime. I asked Monica to talk a little bit about some of the investigations that they're currently doing. We have a full service agency. We have our own crime scene investigators. We have a lot of IT people that do some stuff. What this department has from agencies to size is incredible. And their closure rate's good too. But there are times where you just can't get the information that you're looking for. Because it may not be there. And we've had that in a couple of weapons, things that I was talking about. Because you may show up, there's no damage, no witnesses, you just got casings on the ground, And, good luck with it sometimes. But they look at every one of them as if they can solve it. Now, one thing I know you all want to know about, and several of you made a comment about this incident on the 6th that happened right here at 800 North Path. I will tell you right now that investigation, there's several investigations that are ongoing. The first one is the investigation of the incident here. And that is an ongoing thing. There are certain things that we probably won't talk about because we're still working that case. And we're looking at various people in that process. Some of you have given us video that's been helpful. Some have also shared with us some input in this community that we're following up on. And we don't want to compromise that investigation. The other investigation being conducted is a death investigation. The individual who was chased into in the DC was a suspect vehicle that we were following, was chased in the district. The driver got out, jumped off over a railing, jumped down on the Malcolm X, unassisted, and as we would normally do in any those kind of investigations, we defer to criminal investigation independent of the police department. In this case, DC has the jurisdiction, and they're doing the death investigation. We're giving them the information, the evidence they need to complete that, and we'll wait for their decision on it. When that's done, we will do our administrative investigation, as we do for every kind of use of force or any kind of thing like this. But we want to make sure that they complete the criminal investigation before we do an evidence, because we don't want to complicate that in case there's any kind of wrongdoing. The officers and the personnel that are involved, as per policy, routine, are now doing administrative duty until we get the results of the criminal investigation and then we go from there. Okay? So you got three different things going on. And at some point, we'll find out exactly what the death investigation is going to reveal from DC. Any questions on that? I'd love to be able to share with you anything, but I don't want to compromise that investigation or the efforts of DC in looking at what they're doing. Okay? Let's see. Yes, go ahead.
Once you do have the investigation completed, are you going to share that with the community?
Yeah, once we can get it done, I have no problem sharing it. But the thing is, when you're doing an investigation, if you're following up leads and looking for people, you don't want to give them a heads up that you're doing that to try to find the evidence and all that stuff. So it's very tricky. When we come out with results of even our own admin investigation, I have no problem sharing that. We're going to have to do it with the community review board, which is fine. I don't want to wait till the community review board is all set in place. They'll have the opportunity to come back and reinvestigate it if they want, but we want to make sure that if these officers are good and clear, we want to make sure that they get back on the street. That we have to do an administrative investigation. And I have no problem sharing with what I can. But one thing I don't want to do is make a comment that's going to compromise that death investigation or any of the statements made or that might be made by any witnesses, internal or external, because that would compromise that investigation that needs to proceed at its own pace without influence from the police department. Does that make sense? That's what we do right now with VSP. When we have an incident in the city, and we were the first agency to do this in Northern Virginia, I reached out on our first situation and reached out to the Virginia State Police. So we would have an independent criminal investigation. And it was a shooting. They did the shooting, and the officer was cleared and everything else by the Commonwealth attorney. Some of you have heard about the review team. It's been the critical incident review team that was done by NOVA. They created that because they didn't want to go to VSP. We were actually engaged in the discussion. In fact, Monica was involved in the development of a lot of those elements in that particular thing. And the only reason we didn't sign it is, quite frankly, we were waiting for what was going to happen with the council and the review. And at this point, since this is a new thing, we thought we'd watch and see what they're going to do with this multi-agency thing. Right now we have the VSP and they're willing to do a good job for us. But that was an independent thing that we elected to do. We're not hiding from independent oversight. A number of folks have asked questions about the city and ARHA.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Could you share if this shooting or the shootings that occurred during the last summer and fall, if there's any
Yeah, let me do this. Monica, you wanna come on up? I'm gonna ask Monica, because that's a complex issue. It's not like it's Mike Brown running around doing all this stuff. Okay, let me have Monica give you an overview of what has occurred in the city and some of the work that her folks are doing. They're fully engaged in this. And one of the things that I would also add, a couple of you have raised issues about who else is working on this. When we do investigations, and whether they're even a patrol or in the field, we work with our allied agencies. We work with Arlington, Fairfax County, Prince William County, Prince George's County. We share information. We work with the Major Crimes Task Force, which involves federal and local authorities. We've used assets from the FBI for certain things. We've used ATF for certain things. So we work collaboratively with these agencies. But anyway, I'm going to let Monica cover some of the specifics. Monica, thank you.
Hi, everyone. I didn't quite get the questions of somebody so far away. Can you repeat it, please?
Yeah, I was wondering if, for the shootings of shots fired that occurred in this neighborhood during the last month or past year, there's any common underlying factors that have been identified, and so what the police department is doing to address.
No, there's not a commonality on a lot of these. Some of these may be related, going back to last year to now. Some may involve the same groups of people, but not for everything. When you look at it citywide with the shots fired, Sector 1 actually fares almost the best out of the other three sectors. So the city is broken up into three sectors. Downtown is Sector 1. Out towards Del Rey and Chillicothe is Sector 2, and then the west end is Sector 3. Sector 3 by far has the most shots fired, calls for service, meaning we didn't go and find any evidence, but we received the phone calls. And they have the most of reportable incidents, meaning we responded to a call of shots fired and we found casings or some kind of evidence of crime. And that's where an investigation is done and reports are written. But when you look at these, I have my violent crime sergeant in the back, Brendan Jackson. If you want to see him, he's the guy with the hands up. What we saw last year was this increase in the shots fired. So we decided we had to do something. So we refer to it as our shots fired task force. It's made up of primarily our detectives in our violent crime section and some of our criminal apprehension unit investigators. And since then, what we've been able to do is rearrange some of our staffing in the investigations division. And I have one guy where all of our information on shots fired in the whole city comes through. That way he can vet it out, see what's related to what, and then we can start the investigation appropriately. So that's one of the changes we've made. But when you look at the shots fired cases, like I said, some may have the same people involved, but we don't know all the time what the beef is about, why there was the anger that rose to this level of violence. Some of them are one-offs where it was just, somebody got angry in the community and shot off some rounds. We've been very fortunate, and I hate to say it because there's no wood around me, we've had very few injuries as a result. We've had destruction of property, we've had houses and cars shot up. But like I said, what we really need, and why I'm here tonight, and the major part of why I'm here tonight, is to ask the public for your help. There's a lot of people who know who has guns in the community. There's a lot of people who have that missing information. We need to bring charges against folks. We may think that, person A, B, or C is involved, but until we have some corroborating evidence, we can't go forward with a charge. So if you know that information, please ask me to bring it forward. Nothing's too small. It could be the smallest thing that meant nothing to you. It could be this white car with a blue stripe on it. It means nothing to you, but it means everything to my investigators, because maybe that blue and white car has been seen in other areas during the shots fired. Does that answer your question? Yes.
I have two questions.
Sure.
The first question is, how many officers do you have at night?
Patrol officers?
Yes. The only reason I'm asking that, the only time I get attention on the block, 800 block, is when the shots fired or fight or anything. That's why I asked how many that it is.
That one I'll turn over to patrol.
Yeah, what do you guys want to respond to that?
Because I've been dealing with it for the last almost 3 years. I've been on the Zoom meeting with the mayor and the chief, and nothing been changed. It seems like it got worse. So, I mean, I don't see police at all. I see what, yesterday, 4 o'clock in the morning, just riding through. I don't see it at all any other time. But when something happens on that.
You guys want to respond to that?
So,
I even told officers they just walk past like it wasn't nothing. I wish I'd have got their names, but they ain't anything.
Were they walking?
Yeah, they were walking. They walked right, looked it out, and kept going. So
So-
I'm talking about that, and there'll be people that don't even live in our area that be having alleys full of people. And when I tell them that, they look at me and they just keep on going.
so for staffing at midnight,
Before that,
before midnight,
they be out there all times of the day.
so I can speak to the midnight shift.
It'd be before the midnight. It'd be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have a wife come to that tent. They out there doing whatever they do.
Okay, I'll get
And
the
it ain't
numbers.
just my wife, there's other women too that gets all day night. And like I said, I don't see no officers. Only when I get attention for when there's a shootout or whatever. And I'm like I said, I've been there almost 4 years and 3 years of what I've been dealing with. When I called down to 311, seems like she got an attitude or the other officer want to come. So that's why I'm here to let y'all know this is like, I'm tired of complaining because ain't nothing happening.
So I can speak to the overnight shift that I work.
You need to talk to the afternoon, the evening, and the night. Because when they come out, they is out.
Well, we got them all here, so we're gonna find
I
out.
hope they're listening to me, paying attention, because I gotta live there.
Sir, I think your initial question was how many officers are assigned?
First day, how many, because I don't see any of y'all at night.
Okay, so evening shift has 14 officers assigned citywide. We overlap also with day shift and with midnight shift, again, depending on the time of day, so that number fluctuates at any given point. I understand exactly what you're saying. There's a balance between answering the emergency calls for service that
They
come in.
rude too.
I'm sorry?
They rude.
They're rude,
They
sir?
are very rude too.
Okay, well, that's something I need to know about.
Well, you need to,
Okay.
the lady wouldn't give me her name, but there's a few of them that I called there.
I get that. We'll get you the number for the watch commander's office. You can call that directly. You should tell them what's going on, because that's not.
Yeah,
That's not part of the
I know
game.
my name is already.
Okay, fair enough, sir. And again, I apologize for not knowing that, but like I said, we'll get you the direct line for the watch commander. You call that directly in.
Because they use the pandemic like it was nothing. Every time, if it ain't a pandemic, it wasn't important, they ain't coming out.
Well, we did reduce some of the calls that we responded to due to the pandemic. That was a department-wide decision and went through all the divisions, and certain calls didn't get responded to. So that's a true statement. So
I know.
if some of the calls, what I'm saying is some of the calls that you called in fell into that criteria, you would not have seen an officer.
And they did, half the time they didn't come. Because I sit in the window and wait.
Right. And again, if certain of those criteria were met, they wouldn't have come. That is true during the pandemic. That has been lifted about a month ago, Chief.
Let me respond.
Sure.
Because I've been on the Zoom with them, people been doing some walking and everything.
Let me ask the first question. You said, in fact, what I'm gonna ask you to do is you could stay afterwards, because I'd like to get some more details on this, because I'd like to look into this. You mentioned you called 311.
I called her, man, the first thing she said was, is it important? I was like, what do you mean? I'm like, there's a bunch of people outside that's trashing the area.
Yeah.
And they, that's not important, that's not a pandemic issue. I'm like, so if somebody get hurt, that's an issue? Yeah, sure.
One thing I want to talk to you about that isn't, communications is a different department, it's not ours, but I still want to talk to you about it because the director over there is very interested in that kind of
Well,
thing,
when
okay?
they show my record, my address will be on it.
That's fine, we can track that because 311 calls are actually.
Oh, and I appreciate it, because I know I called them 2 times.
And then the other piece, as what Dennis was saying, is we did have some limited restrictions at the beginning of the pandemic, but that was lifted over the rest of the year, and they were fully operational in the last 6 weeks. And part of that was because we didn't have PPE, we were learning about this stuff, we didn't want our folks exposed on minor things, we were taking telephone reports on certain things. We had people coming out of the buildings to come see us as opposed to going into the home, unless we had to. And that was just as we learned about that stuff. So if that call happened during that period of time, you probably got something that we probably didn't serve you well. So let us look into that for you.
Yes, and I will like I said,
Just hang afterwards, we'll get the details and then we'll follow up with it.
if anything happened to my wife, I'm going off.
I'll tell you, the interesting thing is, we had, one of the incidents that we had with a weapons violation over here, not too far from here, a couple blocks. We ended up making an apprehension, and the apprehension was because the officer was doing foot patrol. And the officer heard it, put the call out, and got the individual involved. So we are engaged at different levels. There's different reasons for, sometimes they're not being there. It sounds to me like this may have been stopped a little bit at the communications level, but let's look into that for you.
If you gotta have the Zoom meeting with you, they part of the us. And then, like I said, ain't nothing changed. Just being honest.
Okay, guys, you got a challenge. You got to change that, at least the perception.
And I know it's another person in here, I'm not gonna say who it is. She's been on there with y'all too. So she has issues where she's at.
Well, if that person would like to come forward, we can talk to them too as well after the meeting. But we're interested in getting the feedback. Courtney Valentine and his division has been set. In fact, we were going to set one up last Saturday. We had to postpone it because of something that came up. But we're going to be doing walks around the neighborhoods, especially around the ARHA community, so we can, in the surrounding areas. And part of that is to make sure we can start making connections with the community, with the officers that work in the community. So you'll see that coming out. I think we have set one this Saturday, if I'm not mistaken.
That's what we discussed on the Zoom.
Yeah. Well, part of the problem we had with we've been doing these town halls, this is really the first one we've had in person inside the building. Well, that's the one we had out here, and that was in response to the shootings that we were having last year. The difficulty we've had in doing some of these is, quite frankly, it's been hard to do it with the restrictions that we've got from the CDC and the guidance that we're doing in terms of meeting. I'm just tickled that we could do this stuff, and I'd rather do this in person than in a Zoom meeting.
Okay. I'll be very good with y'all again.
Okay, yes, sir.
So I'd like to go back to commonality question. I've lived here for 8 years, and all the previous shootings have been fairly targeted in nature. But what's happened in the last 6 months has seemed different. They're earlier in the day. I was out playing with my daughter, and then seeing within 50 feet gunshots. I had to run inside, but there is a difference over the last 6 months, not just the one that happened in North Patrick, but clearly there was at least 2 guns going on. So there might not be commonality between the individuals that perpetrated it, but it's a commonality of people from outside the community coming in. Is it a commonality of individuals being targeted? Is it gang related? Is it drug related? Or commonalities along those lines? Because there is a difference between the last 6 months with shooting than there has over the last 8 years.
Now, that was one of the questions I was going to try and cover, the next time around. It's not all outside the city. I will tell you that a lot of the things we're looking at, we look at people inside the city as involved in some of this activity, people outside the city involved in some of this activity. You're right. The weapons violations changed radically last year. They were happening all over the city at different times, and the commonality was not necessarily there, at least at first glance. A lot of investigation work went in there. In fact, Monty, you might want to cover some of the specifics that you've done in terms of this, task force and the efforts over there. They've made numerous arrests. They've collected drugs. They've collected, some money and some other things, and they're still working a lot of cases. Not all these cases are related to the individual incidents or to the various commonalities that we're talking about. So, Monica, you want to cover some of those?
So as far as the commonalities, we're looking at, there's not even a specific type of weapon, right? We're seeing some assault rifles, we're seeing handguns, we're seeing regular type of rifles, we're seeing some shotguns. We've seen where we can say we think they're shooting at a specific group of people or a person. We've seen where they're just shots fired. So as far as that goes, it's hard to say that there's commonalities, right? We can say some are happening at nighttime hours, some in daytime hours. But what's important is I can give you some of the numbers. So that task force that I was talking about, we started that in October of last year. So about 7 months ago. To date, that group, what are we on? 4 people now. It used to be about 6 or 7. We can bring more people that are already trained and have knowledge of the folks we believe are involved in some of these at any time we need. But they've written over 191 search warrants. So to take you through one of those 74 questions with the investigative process, how that works. So what will typically happen in a shots fired call, any type of call, patrol will respond, they'll take an initial report. That will then get filtered up to investigations, or will come out, like on the April 6th event, we came out, we were on scene. The guys and the girls in the investigation division will start investigating. What's different now, for one case, let's say it's only involving 2 people, the shooter and the person that got shot. So what used to be, you could just get a search warrant for the person's body and the person's house has now changed. So now, let's say you have a Google account, a Yahoo account, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anything like that. Those are all separate search warrants. Your phone records would be a separate search warrant, right? So that takes time. We have to write it, we have to get it approved by a judge or a magistrate, it goes off, we get the information. This is in addition to if we get a phone during the time that we stop somebody, we'll collect that phone and we'll do a dump on that phone. So we have all this information coming in. Some of it we have to wait for, because Google takes a while. Some of our phone companies take a long while. But each one of those things that we see is a search warrant. Now, if we see person A has a friend, person B, we have to do that whole process for B. And then for C, D, E. So one case can have 50 warrants. We've had that before, where we've done 50 warrants on people to get that information. So to date, the guys, there's, like I said, there's 4, and they're all male detectives at the time. But they've written 191 search warrants. They've recovered 36 firearms, and they have arrested 34 individuals. Now, those 34 arrests don't mean that they were involved specifically in a shooting, but when we did search warrant, we may have found a gun and they weren't allowed to possess that gun, okay? So at some point, it resulted in a charge. Of those 34 arrests, 28 of those were city residents. So that was another question is, I've heard, I think it said something like, I've heard a lot of people are coming over from like Fairfax or over the bridge. The majority of the folks that we have arrested are city residents for these firearms. Did that answer your question? Sorry?
Oh, yeah, sort of. I mean, it just seems the last 6 months seem quite different than what has happened over previous years. I mean,
Yeah.
much earlier in the day, these shootings were happening. It doesn't seem as beef related. I mean, look, I'm speculation, but it just seems quite different what's happened the last 6 months than years.
Well, and when you compare, you're right, because when you compare this time frame to last year, we're seeing an increase, because this time last year was what? March and April was the beginning of COVID. There was no one out. Now we're seeing more people out, and we're seeing the results of that. So I think you're right on some of that, but a lot of it still, we're still trying to figure out what is causing this violence, what is sparking these arguments or this anger. So, but
Can
you
you
do have
the
a
same
point.
comment whether or not any of it is gang related?
Sure. Yeah, we have, some of it's drug related, some of it's gang related, absolutely. And some of it's just one off. Some of it, I was a kid of the 70s. When I grew up, you saw people settle their fights with their fists or with their mouths. That's not the case anymore. Now there's weapons. And, for some reason, folks aren't afraid of using them. But yeah, you'll see some gang issues, some drugs issues as far as the weapons violations.
We had, though, an increase in property damage. November, December, our condo is at April 6th. Our condo is the victim of this activity, and, it's frightening. It's not okay. So it's like, I think it's not unreasonable to ask, have a patrol conduct by, or considering, I agree with him, he's saying that he sees people out there loitering and partying, and it's like, inevitably, that night, April 6th, one of my neighbors said they drove by earlier that day, and they knew, by the crowd that was there, they knew something was gonna happen, and it didn't.
Well, I came out to that scene at night and to watch and see how those, I mean, it's straight up, each window had a bullet hole, and yes, it was very frightening.
Because the person that fired that weapon at the building was not in the vehicle. There's no way for them to protect. I'm not a forensic scientist. I'm not a police officer. We trust you guys. I want to applaud you guys for all the things that you do. You don't need to stand up here and prove that you are doing work. We understand that. This meeting is not about everything that you do on a daily basis. It's what we're going to do about this community, this targeted incident, and going forward to prevent that and keep us safe.
But give me the history of what we've been doing, because that's what we're gonna continue to do,
Right, no,
right?
no,
And we have to.
And I wanted to publicly say that, so that none of you feel
Thank
you have to justify why you're here. We know why you're here. We're looking to you as the experts to
But
guide us.
We were there that night, we
Yes.
saw the damage to that building, and we saw what those gunfire, those shots came into people's living rooms.
Yeah, and they came from across the street, not from a moving vehicle. So that person was
behind my house.
right.
I can look at that 40 bullet shell on the ground. My wife couldn't come in the park. We had to sit outside for almost 12:30 because she couldn't park in our driveway because of so many bullet shells.
Your points about wanting to be safe are spot on, and that's why I wanted everybody who's in charge of our program in field ops and investigations to hear this firsthand.
And we want to thank them. We're not here to tell you that you're not doing work. We just want to talk about this incident.
And we appreciate that. This incident is a little tough to talk about because it is under investigation. But the issues that you're bringing up, and this gentleman in particular brought up, I want to talk to him offline about some of the other things that I just discovered here. We brought back the patrol, and if for some reason we're not getting that feeling to you that you feel safe, we have to work on it. Simple as that. And that's why these folks are here, so they can hear that, and then we can figure out a way to make you feel safe. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, regardless of what the numbers are and the responses, if you got a bullet in your hole in your window in the place you live, you're going to be upset, concerned, scared. I would feel the same way, and we are not discounting that one bit. If we have, one of the things that came up, and in the conversation, the 74 questions, there's a lot of concern about what we do with ARHA properties, okay? We work with ARHA. We provide them with our incident reports involving their properties or their tenants. They have their own regulations that they use. The other piece that we do with them is we have residential officers that are living in those communities. And in many cases, we get information, from them in terms of what's taking place. ARHA explains to me that a lot of times they have people that come in that used to live here, come back home, and they're part of the problem. That's ARHA's issue. And is there someone here from ARHA that can explain? Why don't you come on up? At some point, the other thing that we did, ARHA, some of the residents there came up with their own public safety committee meeting. And we were on that. We had that conversation that you're referring to. Courtney and his folks were also on there, and they've been trying to work. In fact, that's where this walkabout thing came as a result. And so we're going to do more of that. But one of the things that we need to be able to do is get help from the community, not just these committees. People telling us stuff, and we shouldn't have gaps like the 311 or anyone else. And so we'll work on how we might be able to open that up so it gets directly to us. And the other part of it is, and we're seeing it in a lot of these investigations, especially in the shootings, there are people who know information for a variety of reasons may not want to share it. We need them. We need your video if we have it. We need all that kind of stuff because it helps us try to take this issue on. But, did you have a question, sir?
No, I was just saying for ARHA.
Oh, wait, here, I'm gonna turn it over to let you kind of speak to that, but their questions came up about, like we had a council board, concerns about how we handle problematic tenants.
So, hi, I'm Gaynelle Diaz, and I'm the Director of Resident Community Services for ARHA. As Chief Brown said, we do have a safety committee that our residents have put together. We have the president of our safety committee here. We also have one of our board members, commissioners here. And we have been working, hand in hand, with the police department because, our residents are, again, as you can see, they're victims of this as well. They're in the same neighborhoods. And if there is a tenant that's identified, yes, we work to eliminate the problem. But I also want to emphasize that what we've been told about police is that, these recent events do not actually involve any of our tenants. And so, again, we're trying, we have been working with them to install more cameras so that we can help to identify, if when things happen. We talked about doing the walkthrough. One of the reasons the safety committee wanted to also do the walkthrough is so there can be improvement in the relationship between the police and just pick everyone in the community because, again, sometimes if there are, nuggets of information that people feel comfortable sharing that information with the police. So we're, doing everything that we can as a landlord to ensure the safety of our community.
I just want to add to what
Come on. So this is actually Lauren, she's also president of the safety committee.
Didn't go more behind the mask.
Hi. I just wanted to add to what Gaynelle said. The committee came about when I moved to ARHA property. I've only been there 2 years. When I first moved there, I couldn't live there. It just wasn't going to work for what was going on. And I've been told by some of the people, they live there, it's their building, all that. And we can only expect so much from them. They just broke down that one shift is 14 officers for all of Alexandria. Not realistic if you have a real 911 call. So I started to do things on my own. I'm probably snitching on myself right now. But I started calling the non-emergency number every single solitary day. The more they saw them, it's been a whole year and 2 months, we have no activity where we live at Princess Way. And we've met with the police officers, and I believe we've been getting a lot accomplished, a lot has changed in my community. When we call, officers do come now. They come quickly, they come respectfully. It's been a totally different nature. So I'm saying this to say perhaps different communities can have their own committees and we start doing things where we bring more police presence. I truly believe, because of my experience, the more we see them, the less we will see the other guys. And it's just a suggestion I want to make.
I know one of the things that he says, I think the best communities are the ones that learn to actually help police themselves, and that it's a matter of all of us working together, not just the ARHA residents, but with all of the other residents, all of us working together.
we're supposed to have, Old Town Commons has cops, community outreach police officer liaison with Old Town Commons and just the community, and that disappeared.
No, it's still there. The problem is many groups are not meeting. So if you would like to meet with, with us, we have someone assigned, I believe, to this group.
I've been asking for it since November, December.
Yeah, we'll take care of it.
We'll take care of it, and we'll be there. We've added 2 others in this last year, micro communities kind of thing. We have 107 of them, I think, now. And we'll keep adding if people want us to do that, because that's a great way to network with certain groups. It isn't with every group. It doesn't get everybody. The ARHA community that we're talking about here, and thank you for saying that, I'm excited about some of the work that our folks have been doing. By the way, it's not 14 officers at a shift at a time. We have 5 shifts. They all overlap. So at one given time, you might have 25, 30 officers out there on the street for the city. You heard 14 on that one shift, but we have 5 shifts in patrol, 7 days a week. And we do that so we can overlap and make responses. Yes, ma'am.
I
really depends upon what the workload is at a given time, like any other policing business. I mean, if there's a workload in a part of the city that is, you know, a lot of calls for service, we respond to those, especially if they're priority calls. And in some cases, we end up responding units from Sector 1 to Sector 3, or from Sector 2 to Sector 1. Generally speaking, when it's quiet, you get to see a lot of cops because they're driving around the neighborhood. They get down in their car because they have the luxury of doing it. But on busy nights, and there are busy nights and days, on a busy shift, they may be busy. They're still out there. It's just that they're working those shifts and working where the calls are. And that's where it boils down to. You will see, we've been pushing the officers to get out of their cars. And some officers, because quite frankly, that's how you get to know the neighborhood. You can't get it when you drive by. Everyone wants to see, I mean, if you drive down Patrick and Henry, I mean, those are major thoroughfares. You're not going to meet anybody there because you're not going to be able to stop. You got to get out of the car and walk the neighborhood. And we have officers that do that. Just tonight before the meeting, I was driving around here. I backed up a couple officers, made one stop, and I'm sitting there listening to the officers. Two officers got out and said, "We're on here for calls for walking." And so they're doing it. We didn't do it a lot during last year because of the pandemic, to be brutally honest, and there was nobody out. But now as people are emerging, we look at that as an opportunity to get out there. And we need your help. If you see us out there, go talk to us. And if you have an unpopular and a difficult conversation with a police officer, you need to let us know. Because we have great cops that if they're not doing it the right way, we need to kind of use that as a teachable moment. So, thoughts? Concerns? Yes, ma'am.
Would you say that there are some things that you guys don't come out for? 2 weeks ago, I called you guys to tell you that there was people on our stairwell going down through the avenue to Princess Street. They were smoking weed, and they said they would send an officer out there. Then they should have told me they wasn't going to.
Yeah, again, that was probably communications. The reason we I hate to say it, marijuana is a civil crime, not a criminal crime like it was. So if you,
But I also told them neither one of them men lived in our vicinity. I know everyone that lives in
yeah, I understand, ma'am, but what I'm saying is that we've been kind of stepping away from enforcing a lot of the civil laws. If there's something that's disruptive, or it looks like they're going to have a fight, or they're doing other kind of behavior, and it relates to a crime, we'll do it. But simple possession of marijuana and smoking in Virginia was decriminalized effective July 1 of this year. It's
Trespassing.
But why would we have no smoking in our
but
area?
if you have no smoking would be a civil matter between whoever you're talking an ARHA property or that's and that would be a civil matter that would be handled by the landlord, whatever the case may be. Now trespassing. Pardon me, sir?
Who do you call if someone's smoking weed in your building?
I would you can probably call it if it's smoking and it's regulated by the landlord, call the landlord. It's legal to have minor possession of marijuana in Virginia since July 1. And this July 1 is going to be legal even more. Simple as that. I mean, otherwise we come out and there's an expectation we're going to make an arrest or issue a citation. We can't. It's not illegal. And trespassing, if you have one person that resides there and they're with the other person, then it's very difficult to establish a trespass. Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. She had mentioned, Monica, Gregg, that most of the arrests are local people. But he would see most of the people he sees are not from around here. So there's a whole lot, it seems, that commit crimes and just beat it out, south, or probably mostly south, and across the bridge, or Fairfax, like you said.
Yeah, it runs the gamut, and it really depends on the crime and the location.
There's a lot of that crossover. I mean, I know one kid for sure that got shot. His mother said he was in Maryland. So then they come here, there was an incident where a whole group of kids, were here. So there is some crossover, from other areas.
There is, and I've not denied that, but there's no real common thread with that. I mean, if you work on one case, a lot of times it's, people local or whatever else, occasionally it's in other jurisdictions. We've had some cases, for example, a lot of those petty larcenies that I was talking about, they would occur at various locations where you have immediate access to go over to across the river. We've had cases that have involved similar cases in Fairfax and Arlington. The folks aren't from here, but they're working in the area. A lot of our auto thefts, vehicles were recovered on the other side of the river. And but again, we don't know who the suspect is yet. Because if we don't have information or fingerprints and stuff like that, evidence to tie a suspect to a car, all we know is we got a recovery of the car over there. So this is not uncommon in an urban area, especially when you have jurisdictions like this. People don't just stay in the boundaries of their city or county or within the district. They travel a lot. And so we get some of that business. And that's why you see some of the trends that we see regionally, like an auto theft, because it's affected most of the jurisdictions around it. And where we see it's organized, we try to investigate. So again, it's not everything's from the city. Some of the cases we're working on are city exclusive. They're people for the most part that are here. Some of them, Monica mentioned, gang activity. Every community has gangs. Our gangs have been a little bit more active this last year. But again, the investigation we're looking at is not just within the city. Some of those people are related to others in different parts of the region. So, yes, ma'am.
So you talked a little bit about how you said that you've seen that community policing has an impact on community watch. Can you talk more about exactly what you're going to do to increase that presence? Because I've lived here for 4.5 years. I've never seen a patrol officer walk down my street. But so if community policing really is effective, what I've heard so far is that ARHA has reached out, and then it was supposed to be a community watch, but then it was canceled for something forward. Can you talk about exactly what you're going to do to make that happen?
Yeah, let me be real clear. The reason we held off on the this weekend's cancellation is out of respect for someone who was having a memorial service, and we didn't want to do it at that particular time. So that's is being rescheduled, and we put that out. That's why it was changed. As far as the policing, whereabouts, if I may ask, do you live?
I live on my house right here.
Right here? Okay. The reason I ask that is because it's important for our captains over here to understand that. We do a lot of different community outreach. We're trying to change the whole perspective of community outreach away from events, but into actually where it's ingrained in the individual officers to get out and establish those relationships. To the point that you made, making sure that when they come out, they say, "Okay, hi, how are you?" Or have that kind of conversation. There's a plan that Courtney has worked out, and we've actually worked with that plan with the captains. At least one of them, we're going to do a trial program here very soon, where we're actually going to help ask the community to give us input to see how we design community policing the way they want it. But community policing is about relationships. And you can't do that when you're running from call to call to call, and you also can't do it if you don't get out of the car. The way I learned about it, that was back in the 70s. That shows you how old I am. This thing's been around for a long time, been labeled the same thing. My training officer told me to get out of the car and walk the strip mall. Go in and say hi to everybody there. Let them know who you are, and then you better make sure you know who they are. And you better make copious notes, because I'm going to ask you about it later. And that's what we did. And as a profession, we got away from it, I think, later on. And we need to get back into it and revitalize it. It should be in everyone's portfolio. Everyone wears a badge. So you're going to look at those kinds of changes. And Courtney is developing a lot of that, and he's working with the patrol commanders on that. And your feedback, like you said, is very valid. And I wouldn't disagree a bit. And I will also tell you, we have officers out there, officers that are in here, who are fully engaged in community policing. I don't want to embarrass them, but there's a bunch of them that I'm very much aware of that they're out there. People know who they are, people call them, they got their cell phone number, they take calls on the weekends and the evenings. How do I know that? Because sometimes they call me about a problem. So, We got work to do.
I know one myself.
There's a lot of you that know them. I mean, I see some heads nodding, some heads nodding. And that's the kind of stuff we want all the time. And Courtney, before we go home, would you give a Holly and get a name for her? I'd appreciate it. Okay. Yes, sir.
So, every time something goes on, a police officer comes and knocks on my door and asks for my security for my phone, for my brother. What are we doing to invest in technology to put cameras up at intersections, public buildings, and things so that I don't have to tell you about the white car with the blue stripe? Because people are bad witnesses, right? They always get it messed up. They can't identify cars, people, they can't get anything right. So what are we doing to actually put technology up so that we can do this stuff professionally and work to the 21st century as opposed to the 20th century?
No, I get that, sir. In fact, that was one of the questions I was going to respond to. There was a question about whether or not the city can establish cameras from all over the place. The city has cameras, but they're used for transportation monitoring. So, but they don't record anything. It's just from a live monitoring of various situations. We've got it on the main thoroughfare of Washington.
With all due respect, 5 years ago or so, when we had the people die back here, right? We did 3 deaths within a few months, right? We had the same conversation, and they said they would invest in that stuff back then. And we still haven't done it. So, do we need to have somebody else die before we actually spend some money? Mr. Mayor, maybe you could chime in. Where are we spending money? You know, to fix this stuff. Because 5 years later, we should be able to figure out where these people are, where they're going, and catch them a lot more easily. So you don't have to spend 190 warrants to figure out a license plate on a car that we should have on tape.
I can't speak to what happened 5 years ago. I've been here before. I've lived in the city, 11. I don't recall that discussion, but I will tell you.
Your predecessor was here and said that they would have,
Yeah. It's the first time I've heard of that discussion. What I did hear is that there was an investment issue in terms of cost, and there was also an issue regarding privacy that was brought up.
They should not have an assumption of privacy when they're walking on a public street. So the privacy issue should not be it.
And cities all over this country have that technology in place. And ACLU can have a good day, but we ought to have that stuff here because if money's the only issue, this is a rich city, and we ought to have that stuff here.
Amen.
So if there's property tax and you guys can't come and do anything about that?
No, we can investigate a trespass if the person's being unruly and the like. But if you and I'm coming to visit you and you live there and you're inviting me to run around, that's not trespass. It may be trespass in the eyes of others, but I'm your guest. And that's where we run into those kinds of situations. Yes, ma'am.
Before I forget, I don't know if you all know this, but just as deadly as shooting is someone running a stop sign. And stop signs on Madison and Montgomery, they get run all the time. I almost got hit maybe 2 months ago where the car swerved and I had to lean back. And so anyway, I don't know what your methodology, but it would be terrible if we lost one of our kids, our neighbors, our grandparents. And my dog's the same, so that would be, I've got the funny car. So anyway, I'm just putting that with you. I don't know how to solve that, but it's pretty common. We've all seen it, multiple occasions, probably once a month maybe, I see it.
I'm going to bring Capt. Gregg up. Jamie's got the traffic safety section, and he can lay out kind of what we do on a regular basis. In fact, Jason is here as well. I saw earlier. Jason he's in charge of the traffic safety section, and they do an awful lot of monitoring and violations and infractions and stuff, and deploy accordingly, and maybe they give you an update on what to do. So, Jamie?
Hello. So your concern is valid. We have a traffic safety section here in the police department. We have 11 officers and 2 supervisors. We handle many complaints throughout the city. That will be added to our complaint log tomorrow. And you will likely see an officer tomorrow or a very responsive unit. The good looking fellow behind you is our commander. And so he heard it, I heard it, and so you're likely to see something there tomorrow. As you know, when we go away, the problem will probably come back, but we can go out there and we can provide some targeted enforcement. What times? Is it all day?
All day. Hey, is there something we can do to help you all?
No. I mean, just by telling us what's going on. I mean, we get hundreds of traffic complaints throughout the city daily. As you know, you could do the Alex Lisle one and make a sort of a formal complaint, but since we're here now, we'll take care of
They race through Alfred Street to get to the green light on Columbus Street, so they're not even seeing the stop sign on Madison and Alfred. And then also the same way on Montgomery and Alfred, they're racing to catch the green light on Patrick Street. And we have a lot of kids, and it happens like when the kids, not so much in 2020, but it happens when the kids are waiting for their buses at school, and it happens when they're getting off their buses and biking and stuff, and it's great. I mean, I walk a lot of kids across the street.
So what you should say is it's potentially a solvable problem because it happens on one block, you have a stop sign between multiple lights. And so drivers are distracted and they just run through the stop sign because they're looking ahead, seeing the traffic lights. So there's ways to solve that. It happens on both one-way streets where you've got lights and there's just one intersection where it's a stop sign. That's what they're blowing through.
We'll take a look at that. The road engineering is we're the enforcement part. TNS does the road engineering. So we'll take a look. We'll get our partners with TNS on board, and we'll take a look and see if the light cycles need to be changed, or the lights need to be, or stop signs need to be lowered. I'm sorry.
Speed strips or bumps. Speed strips or bumps on the streets going up to the things. That was mentioned 5 years ago as well.
Okay. So the police department does the enforcement. TNS does the road engineering. So we can take a look at some of the road engineering that may be a cause of some of these problems. So we'll take a look at that. And, we'll have to get back to you. Maybe after this meeting we can talk about. I can get back to you personally.
Just as a side, we collect when it's an engineering issue. We have regular meetings under our Vision 0 plan with test. And we go through the DES, Transportation and Environmental Services, to discuss these issues. We have discussed issues about undulations or speed bumps with them on certain places where we go in to slow things down. We talked to them about everything from markings. We work with the Alexandria County for safe streets, especially on pedestrian issues. And we get their input, and we take this seriously because one of our biggest issues that comes across at these kinds of meetings truly isn't shooting. It's about traffic, about people walking, people riding bikes, people driving, people coming close, and especially in the intensely urbanized areas with small blocks. And that would be here, Delray, and then we have a different problem on the west side, because the west side you got, multi-lane thoroughfares that are used as thoroughfares when you up to speed. Which, by the way, after 9/11, after this particular pandemic thing, which is kind of a traffic 9/11, the also we've had some really horrendous behavior on our roads. We've had people going way too fast because they can, and it's like they've lost their sense of, reasonableness. And I would encourage all of us to drive safely on our roads and not lose what we used to have in terms of some self-restraint in terms of traffic safety. But it's not everybody. It's something that we've seen, and it's not just unique to us, especially on the west side of the street. Yes, Paul.
We also have noticed 2020, speaking of the traffic and speed, there's lots of speed racing on Patrick and around the community. And I've noticed they're actually parked on the 800 block, the 700 block, the 900 block. And they also have trucks with trailers parked, and they often have different cars that are parked up on their trailer one day, and then the trailer's empty.
Where I live at on Patrick Street,
Yeah.
you can't even turn in the alley.
They're here.
Yeah.
Those speed racers are here with a lot of motors and everything. And I know that there's new laws that say that they can't be pulled over for that, right?
What we're looking at is this kind of stuff that you're talking about, because there's two types of racing that's going on in the city. And most of the racing that we're seeing is, impromptu, unorganized kind of thing where you get two people come along and try to race and take off.
Very organized.
Yeah, that's the other one I'm talking about. What we find in our work with the ESP and some of the others, the experience we're seeing on the Beltway in many cases is an organized practice. And there's pre-safety for some of those events, and we're looking for that kind of information to identify those folks. Jason is in the back nodding because he wants to know that stuff. We had that conversation just last week, as a matter of fact, in response to an inquiry about speed operations. A lot of our reports are what we call heard but not seen. In other words, they hear it, but they haven't seen it. And usually when we get out there, it's obviously gone, they've taken it out. We've had reports all over the city. We've had it up on West Bragg, we've had it up on Beauregard, we've had it up on Duke, we've had it down on Route 1. Actually further north for the most part, a little bit down here. But we're looking for the organized stuff in particular, because the organized stuff is problematic. A lot of times that's the stuff that ends up on the zone. Yes, ma'am.
So in the spirit of, if you see something, say something. And y'all's experience, what would you like us to pay attention to and report?
I'll tell you what, I'm going to have a conversation with Renee Gordon, the director of DEC. What I worry about the most is what your experience is. I've heard a couple of situations since then. I don't want to filter information. And we have to be able to make that contact so that we get the information we need to kind of do things. One of those is through the homeowners associations that we do, but that's only part of it with everybody. The other is the community policing that I was talking about earlier. And we want our officers to establish those relationships like many of the officers that are here do. These are true believers. These men and women that are here are the kind of officers I'm talking about. And we need to be able to do that. Now, one of the things that you also have to be able to do is make sure there's somewhere where you can share that information with. And
I don't feel comfortable calling the 911.
I've heard that before. I'll have that conversation with Renee and see what we can do to fix that. The reason we want to be able to get that information is because we don't want self-screening. For example, what you just described, if you call 311, and they said, no, we would love to have that information. That would play right into our conversation a week ago, because we were looking for that kind of stuff. If that's happening, we want to know about it. We don't want somebody just screening and saying no. So just like your comment.
I mean, it's more than once.
Well, and that's something that because the non-emergency number, the 311 number, is for non-emergencies. And they should be screened, just Capt send. We get a lot of those requests, we don't ignore them. We get the,
So, I heard you say there was more of a problem in other areas, but not so much in this area. I live right on the track, and it is every afternoon and evening with the racing. It's not here, it's not there. You can set your watch by it. And I stood there at the window, and I have watched the cars go around and just keep circling and circling and circling for hours. This racing, and they will stop a couple blocks away just to let the light get favorable for them to race around.
Jason, did you hear that? I'll tell you what, why don't we, after the meeting, you could talk to these two folks about that.
It's about 6 o'clock in the morning, man, they get jammed.
Well, we got the same thing on that. We got Bragg that's inconsistent in terms of how they do it. And on Bragg and Beauregard, out by Seminary, we get reports that it happens at 4 or 3, but not every night. And when we go out there, we have to sleep.
This every morning when they going to work.
But this one may be more organized, and that's the kind of stuff we're looking for. So I'm glad we got that information. That's the reason that I talked about.
I think me and this young lady heard the same thing.
So.
Oh, you want to
We got some work to do. We got some work to do. Here's what I'm going to commit to you. First of all, I'm going to have a conversation with my captain about how we improve the top effort and policing effort, and how we improve our contact with them. I'm gonna also look at the technology. I'll have a conversation with various folks involved in that. And I'm very much aware of the technology, but I also am aware of when I raised the issue before, it's been concerned about Big Brother, privacy, and the cost. But that's not my decision to make, but I'll have that conversation with them. And I'm not going to point to the mayor or anyone else for them at this point. That's not fair.
Yeah, mention his name if you have to.
Well, I'm sure we'll have a conversation. I was not aware of the prior discussion, and I'm not pissing him off, just I was not aware of the prior discussion. One of the questions about ShotSpotter that came up, does anyone know what ShotSpotter is? It's a technology that really it basically triangulates where the shots are taking place. Quite frankly, we don't need ShotSpotter because we kind of get real good information. We kind of know what the shots are happening. ShotSpotter doesn't necessarily stop it; it just reports where it's at. It can be used with camera, and that's what they do in DC. I'm very familiar with that. I actually saw that when they first started out in my prior work. So, but the technology piece is incredibly important. The question is the ones I talked about. I'll raise that comment, have that conversation. Okay? The traffic piece, I need to know. This kind of stuff we talk about, no matter how inconsequential you think it is, you need to call us or email us. And you want to just go around 311, Jason, for a while and see what you get?
I would, so 311, just in case anyone's not familiar with it, it's like call quick. I would say it's like a quick ticket to the police department. If you're noticing problems, like the stop sign concern, people constantly running red lights, I'll give you my business card, you can reach out to me. But through Alex 311, it automatically addresses the person who needs to get it. The traffic concerns that come to me, I'm very proud of how I respond to these. If I get a traffic complaint, you will get a personalized response from a traffic supervisor that very next working day. A unique individual, not templated response. Okay? And then the day after that, you should see an officer on the street. And then the next day, it's the next day. Typically, we run like a 2-week pattern. That's our commitment, that's our goal, that's what we're working towards. So if you're not familiar with Alex 311, I would encourage you to check that out. I think it's a great resource. Again, I have it as far as you can call me. And
I'm going to talk to, have a conversation with the director of emergency communications.
I know my name and my phone number, you can look at the records.
I'll do that. I'll have that conversation.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the gentleman's sentiment. I called the non-emergency line twice. Once the woman was like perfect, like talked me down, and the next woman was like, I'm not a violent person, but now I get it. So she was awful. She was awful, right? So I just want to echo that sentiment.
But when I say it's drugs involved, they come. But let me be like this, snow people that don't live here, and people can't get through the alley. They don't say, they ain't gonna do anything.
Well, if you call the 311 number for.
But that's what your partners tell me. People, the certain numbers I do have that's in here, they tell me to call 311, and when I do, get brushed off.
Okay, I'll look out that conversation.
I even talked to an ARHA employee about it. And she like, really? And I'm like, yes, really.
Well, I will tell you, the city's position on 311 is not to rebuff people.
I respect that, but if you're
If
gonna
they're
do
doing
your job,
that,
don't be rude.
if we're screening the calls improperly, then that's something we need to address. I'll have that conversation. I'll make that
She was
commitment.
rude. I just want you to make sure you look up my name. I'm gonna give you my name
We're
before.
going to talk afterwards, and I'll get that. That was helpful.
I'm sick
Like,
of it.
with that.
3 years of it.
Chief, can I ask for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Delegate Mark Levine, for those who don't know me. A lot of these issues are city issues. Some of them involve questions of state law. If you want to continue this discussion, I have Mark's monthly meetup this Sunday from 1 to 3. Information on our website, markthedelegate.com. You can come virtually, and we continue these discussions. I got to head to another meeting, but thank you all for being here. And there's many things that we done at the city level, but if it's state law that you're concerned about, please come. We have a 2-hour discussion. We can have a long talk about all these things. Thank you, and thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so I've got those 2 minutes out there. What am I missing? Yes, ma'am.
So I just want to be clear, so, you know, heard a lot of complaints about 311, and you're saying we should use it, like, so right now, what's the best way to?
What I would do, what Jason's gonna give you for the traffic piece is his direct stuff, so you can get a hold of him. I'm gonna have that conversation with Beck, from the Department of Emergency Communications and Consumer Information this week. If I can get to her tomorrow, I'll talk to Renee. Because she needs that feedback. Because that's not what she wants or the desire of the city in terms of 311. It's not to put things off, it's to capture stuff so we can deal with it if it's not an emergency. As you heard from Jason, that's how he handles them when they come in. But if they don't get to them, then we got a problem. Same thing with some of the other stuff that you may have reported, like this gentleman has. So we need to get that information. What I would recommend, I'll tell you what. This is gonna get, I will leave it up here for those of you that are interested in my business card. You call me and we'll follow it up. How's that?
Sounds good.
You'll have my email address and you'll have my phone number. So you call me. And the reason I say that is because that way I can identify where some of the breakdowns are and we'll fix it. The city is a big commitment to trying to fix things and improve communications. We listen to a lot of things that many of you know. And if things aren't working out, then you know what? We need to look into it. And if it's not the police department, I'll work to drive with the other departments to make it happen. And some of those programs, like 311, we rely on a lot. And if it's not getting to us for whatever reason, then that's an issue for me, an issue for the police department. So I'll leave my business card up here for you folks. I'll give you one directly if you want to share with your association. You can't. Call me. I'm going to end up with 40 phone calls. Or email, either way. We got access when we sort this thing out. Okay? No, I mean that. You know, I will tell you, and I've said this over and over again, this is a time that's very difficult for policing. This department, like other departments, has officers who have dealt with the same kind of things that a lot of other people have. Some have had loss of income in their job, in their homes. Some have had family members that have come to live with them because they lost jobs, lost family members and friends. Some of them have gotten COVID. And the other thing is, we've had, on top of that, this whole discussion of the reimagining policing. And yet these men and women come to work every day. And I'm continually impressed by them. I was impressed before 2020. I've been hanging around cops for a long time, and quite frankly, this is an excellent department. And it's because of the people that are here. And we need to kind of get them, you know, they're going through transition, they need your support, but we also need to set it up so they can be successful. So what we're talking about here in the plan, community policing, the goals, the vision, and things like that, that's our job. To work with our folks to get there and to bridge those gaps together. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be here tonight and to share your feelings. It's not gone without notice, and it's not just me that's listening. What you have here is pretty much the entire command staff, or at least the division commanders who manage these programs for you in the police department. And they need to hear it firsthand. Do you guys have any questions or comments that you would like to offer?
I got one comment to make, just for clarity on real-time traffic complaints. You can call the you can call the non-emergency number. I know that. I know it may not be the best action, but if calls permitting, we will send an officer out to the location.
You mean the 911 number?
Yeah, 911. It's the same people that answer the phone. It's just a different ring. So if you call 911 or 4444, the same group of people is going to answer the phone. So the 311 is an option, but if it's a real time, if you see people racing around town or people running the stop sign, time permitting, we will have an officer sent out there.
I've been told by the mayor at a previous HOA meeting, because we had problems with calling 911 on cell phones. So it pings off from a different tower in Maryland or DC. But I have called the non-emergency number and it rang and didn't answer. And then I was told though that's because the operators were taken from the non-emergency to the emergency, to the 911. They were responding to 911 calls. So you have to be like vigilant and continue to call until somebody actually answers also. And then I understand with the 911 with the cell phone, but the non-emergency shouldn't be pinging you to some other city. It's not. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a great question, and I don't know, that's the first time I've heard that, I'll bring that to the attention.
Yeah.
I will tell you that there are times when it gets really busy, you know, when we're having a major event, we have those over the years since I've been here, and they will redirect communications, you'll have like all hands on deck on that incident and handling 911. So there are times where 311 and others will go, just go on range, but that's a temporary thing, it doesn't last very long.
Just windows, gunshot.
But to Jamie's point, don't call 311 if you're having an emergency. I mean, they'll triage that call if it's not an emergency, and they ask you some questions. But don't just immediately call 311 if it's going to be something that you need a cop right now. And we've had that in some discussions as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate the openness of you and your staff, etc. However, with all this historical information you've given us, I think there are some of us here that want to know what the hell happened on the 6th of April that caused bullets to enter into people's residences.
I will tell you this, when we can, we will come back and share that with you, but I don't want to say anything right now because it's an active investigation. I do not want to compromise the potential of apprehending somebody that's responsible for that, and we're working on that rather significantly. It's not being, low prioritized or anything like that. But I will make the commitment when we can, we'll come back and talk to you about that, but I can't do it right now.
I hit the floor when it happened.
What's that?
I hit the floor when it started shooting. They lit the whole front of our house.
Yeah.
There was so many bullets, you could right, it was horrible.
There were a lot of rounds that we spent.
And I mean, when I thought, at first I thought it was fireworks, because I was watching basketball.
I did too.
So when about time the automatic went off, I hit the floor, started walking to the next room. And went out to look at the back room, I just seen all these guys pulling up in the alley, but they was gone. Whoever people were shooting.
I'll tell you, I will say this, which won't screw up your investigation. It blew me away that your police officers were able to identify a car and chase him across the river. No, seriously. So that's, I still want to know who the hell these guys are. But
I'm not going to get it.
I'll tell you, this is a complicated case for a lot of different reasons. And I just ask your patience. We're going to go through the process of independent investigation. As I mentioned before on this case, we're still doing the investigation. This is proceeding. The other piece is another thing we have to wait for is that investigation concluded in Washington. And then we'll deal with it accordingly. But in a lot of respects, I, like you, was impressed with the officer's vigilance and their ability to kind of move on this issue. But this case isn't closed yet, and we got work to do. So, again, I'd love to tell you if I could, but I don't want to compromise an investigation. I hope you'll understand that. But we'll come back and chat with you about it when we get this thing done. Okay?
So who the person I talked to about getting my name on the phone?
Well, I think you guys were hanging with us. It's, you kind of had me, on the ropes here a little bit. I'm just being as frank as I possibly can.
We appreciate that.
Well, this is a messy business. And sometimes, we meet the needs of the community. Sometimes we don't. But whatever we do, we have to listen to, including the legitimate criticism. And we have to find a way to fix it. Your concerns here are incredibly valid. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this, if that had been my residence, and I would have saw some of the stuff I saw in the windows, that I understand you have to wait for getting replacement parts for, or because it's custom made.
That's the minor thing. The real thing is, to be honest with you, survive here. We've been here over 4 years. We've had these, what we also call it one-offs, where, there's a fight between these two guys, and this guy got shot and got killed, and, you move on. This was low. This is first floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor, bullets through the windows.
Cars.
Yeah, I mean, it's,
Just thought it was cars, basically.
but it's terrible.
It shapes your comfort level.
Oh,
it makes you scared. It makes you angry. How am I doing?
You're doing great.
That's how I saw it with just one little arrow through my wall. A crossbow arrow. I can't imagine. I've never had that.
I can't believe you live in a neighborhood where guys make a crossbow.
It wasn't here. It was in a prior life. Yeah. If I'd stood by the coffee pot at one point in time, I would have found it. It would have been an interesting time. It went right between the coffee pot and the can opener to the kitchen. And I couldn't understand it when I saw it in the morning. What is that? When I realized what it was. But that's different than what you guys experienced. I've never experienced that. I can understand it. We're going to get this and solve this thing as best we can. They're working on it big time. And we got
It's been 3 years, and I'm not like trying to put you down. I've been there 3 years, and this activity been going in there for 3 years. It seems like it just get blown off. So that's why I'm here, expressing my feeling for everybody to hear what I got to say. Because it seems like I'm the only one in the neighborhood that cares. You know what I mean? And that's like what the people say, there is a bunch of kids out there right now. And the parents, I ain't gonna say they ain't out there, but the people that's out there causing the problem, they don't care. They get in their car and go back to DC or Maryland. That's where all that's coming from. People that don't live in our area comes to hang in my alley over there, I ain't gonna say mine, but that alley, and there's people from DC and Maryland that's tearing about it. That's why I was wondering if I could get some type of control, because I ain't getting none. But see, Mr. Peanut over there like a week ago, he sat there out about an hour. That's the only cop I've seen since that day.
This guy over here?
Mr. Peanut.
Dang, I had no idea.
We've been knowing me since '94, so.
When I was at 3CF.
Well, Benny's an example of that. We've got officers that are doing that, but we need to kind of look at trying to figure out. Let me get back to that. We'll have that conversation. That's why I wanted them here. I wanted them here. Okay?